Hello everyone, what an amazing audience, and a big, huge congratulations to all the fantastic girls. I thought your project sounded brilliant. And actually, what I'm going to talk about is really relevant, because I'm talking about representation of older women. So you're totally right. So this is my organisation. So you're totally right about the representation of, different kinds of skin colours, or like acne, or I've got two girls who are 21 and 18, so it's very familiar territory to me. But it's not just bad for teenagers, it's bad for everybody, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And this is something that is really close to my heart, and I feel really passionate about, because I spent 25 years as a very senior editor in UK media, and I was also chair of something called Women in Journalism. And I've been obsessed by the fact that the media is not a mirror. It's not like you look at it and you look at it and it gives you a direct reflection of who you are. It's a distorting lens. And it's a distorting lens through male eyes, often through old, posh, white male eyes. And so this is what I'm going to talk to you about, because I'm really passionate about this. And I also really know what I'm talking about, because I had a front row seat. I was in the front of the juggernaut of the mainstream media for 25 years. I edited the Sunday Times magazine. I was the editorial director of the Sunday Times. I was an interviewer. I've interviewed everyone from home. We'll get onto this in a sec. Anyway, so when I talk about the media, I really have sat inside it and felt it and been in the rooms and made the arguments. So now I run something called Noon. I talk about Queenagers. Queenagers are women like 45 plus, midlife queens, living their best lives. And what we try and do at Noon is to tell a new, more positive story about the second half of women's lives, because we are not done yet. Okay, so this is me. So, yeah, sorry, I've given you that. You know about that. It's a rather weird picture. So so that's me outside number 10 Downing Street, where I had gone to interview Theresa May. Some of you will remember the interview. It was the one where she wore her leather trousers. That was my interview. It was a bit of a car crash for Theresa May, because she did not tell me anything in the interview. I actually turned the cassette recorder off, or my thing off at one point, and went, "You've got to tell me something. This is meant to be like a front page story and the cover of the magazine, and I've got nothing." And then she came down with the leather trousers, and I was like, well, at least now we've got a story. Not necessarily the story she thought it was going to be, but hey. But anyway, I also did like Gorbachev, One Direction. I sat on a sofa surrounded by all of One Direction. That was quite fun. I was a columnist, all that stuff. You've seen that. So just before I turned 50, just at the beginning of the pandemic, I was fired. Well, I wasn't fired. I was made redundant. They brought somebody else in, and I was out. That happens a lot as you get senior in companies. We used to call the 13th floor, which is where all the executives were, the dead zone. It's a bit like climbing Everest. You kind of get to a point where the air is thin, death can come at any time. So I thought I was all going rather well. It was all great. I was this big journalistic honcho, and then I wasn't. And this happens to so many women. Hang on, I'm going to go on a bit. So I set up. Hang on. Let me go back to this one. I left the Sunday Times. I had been there since I was 26. I was very sad. My children would say things like, "What's the mum weather like today?" Drizzle, rainstorm, full-on thunderstorm. How much was I crying? I can joke about it now, but it wasn't particularly fun. Because what happened was my whole identity had been wrapped up with doing this job, and then suddenly I was out of the job, and I really had no idea who I was. And I looked around me, and I remember Googling midlife redundancy, and all I got was the HMRC website, which... the tax man, for those of you who haven't had to fill in your stats yet. And let me tell you, it was not the kind of inspiring content that I was after. So I had a good look around me, and I've always believed that it's important to be the change that you want to see in the world. And I looked around and I couldn't see anything that was telling a more positive story about women. And I started looking at it, and we are now all quite likely to live till we're 100. And then I thought, 100? I'm 50. That means it's only lunchtime, you know. And I feel like, and I wrote this article for the Telegraph about being made redundant and how awful I felt. The headline they put on it, was I on the scrap heap? And this is not me making it up. This is truly the headline that they put on it. Welcome to the 50-something redundancy club. And I wrote this piece. It was a very honest piece about how horrible it was and how humiliated I felt and how shameful it was. And I had about 10,000 people get in touch with me saying, this has happened to me too. Nobody talks about redundancy. It's a bit like death. You know, no one wants to say the word. They don't want to ring you up. It's really grim. And I write about that in my book. So because I looked around and I couldn't see anything that was actually going to help anyone like me reinvent. And also because I've been a columnist for a very long time. So I had a kind of confidence that things that had happened to me were probably happening to other people. Because when you write about stuff, your life, whatever, every week, you kind of know that when you really write from the heart and you're really true about something that's going on in your life, that always connects. So that's one thing I want you all to really remember, that if you're going through something awful, you won't be the only one. And if you're honest about it, you'll get people to kind of, you know, galvanise around you and to be sympathetic. So I set up this organisation called Noon, partly because in the 100-year life, 50 is only halfway through, it's lunchtime, so I called it Noon. Thought it was quite easy. And I also thought that was a way of rebranding this whole thing, because one of the most terrible things in our culture is the sense of, you know, what are women for after 50? If we're entirely seen through a kind of media lens and a culture which basically values women for being young, fanciable, kind of fecund, so fertile, that is the kind of patriarchal lens on women. When you hit 50, you know, or you know, you're no longer seen as hot, fanciable, and you can't have kids anymore because you've hit the menopause. You're basically pretty done, right? It's through that lens. And that made me really angry, because I think that that's like seeing women in black and white, you know, and we're not just valuable for being fertile or hot. We're valuable for all the things that we are: our creativity, our kindness, our intelligence, our compassion, our energy, our being able to row across the Atlantic, you know, all the incredible things that we've heard about today. And it made me feel really angry that there were all these women, and all of you coming up behind us, feeling that there was some kind of a shelf life on being a woman, that men can have a full life and women have a half life, particularly in kind of media and TV and that kind of thing. And that nobody seemed to be telling a more positive story about what it was possible to be, you know, 45, 50 plus. So that's why, I mean, I've written a lot of headlines in my life, and one of the ladies at one of my focus groups said to me, she said, Eleanor, I feel like a teenager, but in my own house with posh sheets and nice tea. Which I really love. And then there was another woman who said to me, you know, I'm in my 60s and I feel like I'm just getting the hang of this life thing. I keep thinking, don't walk out in front of a bus and, like, you know, mess it all up. You know, I'm just getting the hang of this. And I also spend a lot of time in Jamaica, where they talk about older women often as queens, and I love that. So in my stupid kind of headline writing brain, I came up with Queenager, which I thought was a really good description of how it felt to be kind of 50 and setting out on a whole new path. And also, in the 100-year life, we're all going to have to keep pivoting. I'm looking at my daughter who's just left university, and she's in that wonderful phase where you are in your early 20s, where you're kind of looking around and going, what am I going to be? You know, she's a bit scared about it. You know, what do I do? It's like, what am I going to be? But I think that there's this amazing opportunity when we hit midlife, where we get that again. Because basically, whatever we've been between the ages of about 25 and 50, kind of comes to an end after that. You know, if you've been super successful at your career, which I had, it can still all end in chaos. You know, it's absolutely not a given that it's all going to be all right. And also, as we all live for longer, we're going to all have to change and pivot and do different things. So I now run a community of women called Noon, home of the Queenager, which is, and we run retreats and events, and we do lots of, this is us at a Queenager night about finance. This was the winning team who'd won a big prize for knowing about money. This is one of our circles in Surrey. I'm a big believer about getting people into cold water, partly because I love it and it was what saved me after my own defenestration from the Sunday Times, but also because I find that if we are going to change, if you're going to move from being what you have been to something new, you've got to go into uncharted territory. And I think often as we get old, we can get, and actually when we're younger too, we can be a bit frightened of things that we hadn't done before, of being outside our comfort zone. So what I do with all the poor women, or the lovely, amazing Queenagers who come to Neen, is I often take them to somewhere with a lake, and I encourage them to get in it with me. And I do that not because I'm a sadist, but because the experience of doing something that you were frightened of, and it being okay, actually not just being okay, it being wonderful and making you feel ecstatic and, you know, is important, not just for its own sake, but as a metaphor for the other things that you can do in your life. And I think one of the other really key thing that I would like you to take away from this talk is that it's really important to put yourselves in situations which are uncomfortable or scary or that make you feel challenged. Because, and there's that great old phrase, if you're not sitting on the edge, you're taking up too much room. But on top of that, if you're not in that place, you're not really stretching yourself. I'm not saying you need to be there all the time, but I think particularly when you know you need to get from one place to another, then pushing yourself really out of your comfort zone, going and doing something that you haven't done before, can give you the confidence required to take a step into the unknown. And so that's what I'm often doing when I'm putting these ladies into, or the invitation being to the ladies to get into the lake with me. So I wrote a book